Everyone, and welcome to tonight's Tisch College Distinguished Speaker Series event with Chairman Adam Schiff. My name is Nandini Kumar, and I am a second-year Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy candidate at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I'm pleased to kick off tonight's event. Before we get started, I want to thank the Political Science Department, Jumbo Vote, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute for co-sponsoring tonight's event and for their valuable partnership. Tisch College has been honored to host many events and leaders virtually this fall, and there are many more to come. On Monday night, we will host foreign policy expert and former Deputy Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. And on Wednesday night, we will welcome author, professor, and renowned thought leader, Bob Putnam, for a conversation about his timely new book, The Upswing: How Americans Came Together a Century Ago and How We Can Do It Again. You can find more information and register for these events by visiting tishcollege.tufts.edu/events. For folks in the Zoom room tonight, we hope you will ask our speaker a question. You can do that by submitting your question via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen anytime during the event. The Tisch staff will be in touch with you directly for additional instructions. Now, I'm honored to introduce our esteemed guest, Chairman Adam Schiff, and tonight's moderator, Dean Alan Solomon. Both speakers have long and very distinguished biographies. But in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Currently, in his 10th term in the US House of Representatives, Chairman Schiff represents California's 28th Congressional District. Throughout his tenure in Congress, he has focused on growing the economy, bolstering national security, strengthening communities, helping small businesses, and improving education, safety, and healthcare for children. Chairman Schiff currently serves as the chair of House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which oversees the nation's intelligence agencies, including components of the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Justice, State, and Energy. Chairman Schiff also led the impeachment inquiry against President Trump and was the lead impeachment manager earlier this year, chosen by the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to lead the prosecution during President Trump's impeachment trial before the Senate. Prior to serving in the House of Representatives, Chairman Schiff completed a 4-year term as state senator for California's 21st State Senate District, chairing the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Senate Select Committee on Juvenile Justice, and the Joint Committee on Arts. And before that, Chairman Schiff also served with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles for 6 years, most notably prosecuting the first FBI agent ever to be indicted for espionage. He's also a proud graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Law School. Joining Chairman Schiff in conversation today is Alan Solomon, the Pierre and Pamela Omidar Dean of Tisch College. Dean Alan Solomon is well known in the realms of diplomacy and public service himself. He is a lifelong social and political activist, most recently having served as the United States Ambassador to Spain and Andorra under President Obama. Before serving in Spain, Dean Solomon chaired the bipartisan board of directors of the Corporation for National and Community Service, the federal agency that oversees domestic service programs such as AmeriCorps, Learn and Serve America, Vista, and Senior Corps. He got his first exposure to national politics as a Tufts undergraduate in 1968 when he worked as a page during the tumultuous Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Later, he served as the party's national finance chair from 1997 to 1998, and he played key roles in more than 5 presidential campaigns. Dean Solomon is also a proud Tufts Jumbo and a lifelong supporter of Tufts. having served as a visiting instructor and senior fellow, founding board chair and dean of Tisch College, parent and trustee. It is my pleasure to introduce Chairman Adam Schiff and Dean Alan Solomon. Now let's get started.
There we go. Thank you, Nandini. That was a very kind introduction. And welcome, Chairman Schiff. We're just delighted to have you at Tufts University and at the Tisch College for Civic Life. So let's just jump right into it. I'd like to ask you my first question, something not quite policy oriented. I understand you're a marathon runner and you've also competed in triathlons. You're a vegan. And it's also been reported that you've been writing screenplays for years, including a murder mystery and a spy drama. I don't know where you get the time for these additional activities, but could you tell us a little more about this side or these sides of Adam Schiff?
Well, Dean, thank you for the question. And Nandini, thank you for the very nice introduction. It's a pleasure to join you all tonight. It's funny that you should ask me about the screenplays, because at one point when I think the president was struggling to find new ways to criticize me, he attacked me as a failed screenwriter, which I guess is probably maybe the most accurate thing he's had to say about me. But I live in LA. I represent Hollywood. I'm an attorney. That's what you do when you live in LA and you're an attorney. You write screenplays. So I actually find it a nice kind of creative outlet to write about something that's not serious, that is not political, or if it is, it's political in a very kind of abstract way. So it's a nice departure, and the sport's the same way. I really do think that there's nothing to clear your head better than going out and getting a nice workout. One of my favorite pastimes, which I seldom get the chance to do, is scuba diving, because there you really can't be thinking about anything else. But I have to say my kind of endurance sport participation went dramatically down in the last 4 years. Right. I just haven't had the time to train, but I'm hoping that I may have a little more opportunity to do that again soon.
Have you run Boston?
I have not. No, I actually am more of a triathlete than I am a marathoner. I don't really have the knees for that kind of sustained pounding.
I'm still going to extend an invitation, because Tufts has a Tufts President's Marathon team. And any year you were interested in running with the brown and blue, you're invited.
Okay.
In your first tries at elected office, you lost in 2 campaigns for the California State Assembly. Then you were elected to the California State Senate. And 4 years later, you took on the guy that had beat you for the Assembly, and you took away his congressional seat. What drew you to public service? And by the way, since then, you've been reelected to Congress 10 times. So could you just share with us what drew you to public service, and specifically to elected office, and enabled you to persist after losing in your first couple of tries?
Well, you know, I think what initially drew me to public service was having the opportunity to, you know, as a law student in Boston, be exposed to a litigation workshop that Alan Morrison taught, where we had assistant United States attorneys come and teach us trial skills, and it kind of piqued my interest in becoming an assistant U.S. attorney, which I ultimately did, and served in that office in LA for about 6 years. While I was there, I had a very good friend run for the state legislature and was elected. And he had the chance to work on a whole host of issues beyond public safety, but even when it came to public safety, he had the chance to work on preventive things. You know, when you're a prosecutor, as you know, generally the crime has already been committed, and your responsibility is to put the perpetrator away. You don't have as much of an opportunity to try to prevent crime from taking place, or address some of the issues that lead people into that life. And so I was very attracted to what he was doing in the legislature, and that's what really, I think, cemented my interest in that. I growing up in Boston, I think as a kid, I probably breathed in the air the Kennedy ethic of service. And so that has always been with me. I didn't know what form it would take. And I wasn't always wedded to it being public service, an elective office, but I wanted to serve in one form or another. And, I'll say this about losing, which, you're absolutely right. I did a lot of it when I was starting out. I didn't come into politics with a family name in politics. I didn't come into politics with money. And I knew I was going to have to, take my licks along the way and try to learn from it. And I did. Believe me, I highly recommend winning the first time if you could do it. But I did try to learn from my failures and try to find in the seeds of defeat a future victory. And so I'm glad that I stuck with it, because it has been a very rewarding line of work, very satisfying, very challenging, very interesting. So I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, we're glad you stuck with it too. And I know a couple of people who became United States presidents who lost their first races. By the way, did you ever take a course with Alan Dershowitz at Harvard Law School?
I audited a class with Alan Dershowitz, but I have to tell you, I stopped attending because it was basically the world according to Dershowitz. It was, I didn't feel I was learning much law. I was just basically hearing Alan Dershowitz stories, which wasn't enough to keep me engaged. But I'll tell you, during his first presentation during the impeachment trial, I found it really interesting, more interesting than the other House managers, I think. I just found it interesting from an academic point of view. He then went completely off the rails and ended up hurting their case, I think, tremendously, making an argument that as long as you believe it's in your reelection interest, then no abuse of power is impeachable. But I did, every now and then have to pinch myself to realize I was arguing constitutional law with Alan Dershowitz on the floor of the Senate. That's not something I thought I would do when I was a law student so many years earlier.
Well, speaking of impeachment, we had the former special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee, Norm Eisen, on Monday evening. You were in the role of chairman of the Intelligence Committee, one of the lead investigators in the impeachment inquiry, and then you were chosen by Speaker Pelosi as the lead impeachment manager. So let me ask you this, knowing that the Senate was never going to convict, was it worth it? Would it have been different if you were able to call witnesses? And how do you think it affected the presidential race?
Well, I was a late convert to the cause of impeachment. During the course of the Russia investigation, I continued to maintain, while many of my colleagues were in a different place, that we ought to complete our investigation. We ought to let Mueller complete his work, and then we should make a decision on whether that remedy is warranted. I also believe that the strongest argument for impeachment was also the strongest argument against it. And that is, if we didn't impeach the president when he was committing such abuses of power, what would that say to future presidents about their ability to engage in that conduct without repercussion? On the other hand, if we did impeach him and he was acquitted, what would that say to future presidents? But what changed my mind, what in my view made it inevitable and very important for us to undertake, whatever the verdict may be, was the fact that immediately after Bob Mueller testified, and Donald Trump felt that he had finally escaped accountability for his unethical conduct during his first campaign, he was back on the phone, this time trying to coerce another nation to help him cheat in the next election. Now he had the full power of his office to put behind that coercive effort. As a candidate in 2016, he could ask for Russian help, and he did, and he could get Russian help, and he did, and he could lie about it, and he did. and he could obstruct justice, and he did. But as president, he was in a position to use the full force of the government to try to make it so, withholding hundreds of millions of dollars from an ally at war in order to do it. And the fact that he would engage in that conduct immediately after feeling it escaped accountability the first time told me that he took away exactly the wrong lesson from the Russia investigation, which is he could do anything and get away with it. And so it was very important, I think, that the House use the most powerful remedy it had, even if that remedy was ultimately going to be incomplete, as it was. Would it have made a difference in the Senate if we'd been able to call witnesses? It may have. Bolton's testimony obviously would have been devastating. I don't think Bolton's testimony alone would have been enough. What I thought, and frankly, I did not know Bolton's testimony would be as damning as it was. I have little trust in John Bolton, but I thought that it had the potential of leading to other witnesses that the Senate would also find the need to hear. And had that happened, it might have changed the result. But Mitch McConnell was never going to allow that to happen. And the president's enablers in the Senate were also never going to allow that to happen. And so it was not a surprise, ultimately, that McConnell produced the votes to conduct the first impeachment trial in history without witnesses. Was it worth it? Yes. I think that stain on Donald Trump, he is now one of only 2 presidents in history to be impeached in their first term, and the only president to be lose the popular vote, be impeached, and serve only 1 term. He has that historical legacy, and that matters. What effect did it have on the current presidential race? I think it had this effect. Republicans and the president didn't talk about it because they felt it didn't help him. And if anything, it hurt him. Democrats didn't talk about it because we thought it was more important to talk about the pandemic and the fact that 200,000 of our fellow citizens were perishing from this. But I do think it had the effect of clarifying for the country who this man is, his lack of morality, his dishonesty. One of the points that we made over and over again during the trial was this man who lacks any decency, who doesn't know right from wrong, will not do what's in the best interest of the country, only what's in his best interest. That was borne out in horrific fashion with his handling of the pandemic. And I think his tragic mishandling of the pandemic validated and vindicated all of the fears that we expressed during the trial. So I do think we helped to tell the story that the American people needed to hear. I also think we helped tell the story that people who read this chapter of history will need to hear so that we can hopefully avoid it ever happening again.
As a former prosecutor, were you surprised that the Mueller report didn't deliver a clearer, less ambiguous message, or a message that could be used to cloud the issue? It did seem not to be as powerful as maybe people were expecting.
I would say a couple things. That the president benefited from the fact that the vast majority of the information that would come to be in the Mueller report came out well before the Mueller report in drips and drabs over a 2-year period. Had we learned everything that the Mueller report had to say, or everything we discovered in our investigation in the House, had we learned it on a single day by getting a report, the reaction of the country would have been very different. If on a single day we learned that the Russians reached out to the president's son and offered dirt on Hillary Clinton and put it in writing and described it as part of the Russian government's effort to help elect Donald Trump, and the president's son had said that they would love to have that help and that in late summer would be the best timing for that help, and arranged a secret meeting in the Trump Tower in New York and lied about it, Had we learned of that on a single day, at the same time we learned that the president's campaign manager was meeting with an agent of the Kremlin and providing the Kremlin with internal campaign polling data while the Kremlin was engaged in a covert social media operation to help the Trump campaign, and many more facts like this, it would have been an overwhelmingly damning portrait of collusion. And I think the fact that we learned a piece here and a piece there, and by the time the Mueller report came out, it seemed like old news and not much new. And it was written, as you say, in kind of a turgid fashion, very dense. I think that it didn't have the impact that it would have otherwise. You add to that Mueller's inherent conservatism, his unwillingness to, frankly, cross any of the red lines that the president drew, including one of the most significant, which is, you shall not look at my finances, my indebtedness, and what it may say about any reliance on foreign money. You know, that led to a very incomplete report and conclusion.
You recently introduced legislation entitled the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which seems to be an effort to prevent future actions of the sort that led to the House impeachment of Donald Trump. Could you tell us a little bit more about the bill and what it seeks to achieve?
Certainly. We, around the time of the impeachment, began drafting a comprehensive set of reforms, our own, what I would, kept calling our own post-Watergate reforms. After Watergate, Congress over the years passed any number of protections to avoid the kind of abuses that were experienced during the Nixon administration. And those served us really well. They helped maintain the independence of the Justice Department. They helped curb abuses of the intelligence agencies. They helped rein in unethical, improper, illegal campaign contributions. They served us very well. But a lot of the norms that were established during that period that were not put into law, norms that we thought were inviolate, it turns out you can violate, and you can violate with impunity if you have a president with no moral compass and you have a leadership of the president's party unwilling to stand up to him. That has in effect become a cult of the president. And so we looked at all the things that have broken down and made an effort constitutionally to try to prop up our institutions once again. So in the package, we have measures to strengthen the independence of the Justice Department. We have methods to enforce the emoluments clause, should another president seek to use the Oval Office to enrich themselves. We have measures to stiffen the penalties for violating the Hatch Act, should another president try to hold a political convention on the White House grounds. We have measures to curb the abuse of the pardon power, some of which we've already seen, some of which we may see in the next 2 months, making it a crime to exchange a pardon as a form of a bribe, prohibiting the president from pardoning himself or herself, tolling the statute of limitations so that the president can't escape criminal liability by staying in office. And this may be among the most important reforms, we provide for expedited court enforcement of congressional subpoenas. So no future administration can play rope-a-dope with us endlessly in the courts. We protect whistleblowers and inspector generals. It's quite a long list. And we had no optimism that it would become law during Trump's presidency. But I am hopeful that in the new year, Republicans will support this package because they won't want to do any of the things that Donald Trump did. They will want their own subpoenas to be enforced, not ignored by the Biden administration. Mm-hmm. They won't want the Biden administration to use the federal workforce as an extension of their campaign. They won't want the Biden administration punishing whistleblowers or firing inspector generals. They won't want the Biden family to enrich itself by using the power of the presidency. The only reason Republicans might not support the package next year is if they're still living in terror of Donald Trump and afraid that doing so will earn his disapproval because of how it implicitly is a criticism of his misrule.
I want to ask you about the recent election, but perhaps you could help us understand how he is able to enforce that kind of discipline, if not that kind of fear, among people who were devoted their lives to public service. I mean, it's, you know, they didn't do that. I mean, they've entered this to do, presumably to serve the public. And yeah, I think some of us just scratch our heads. We're used to it. We're appalled by it, but we don't quite get our arms around how it has happened.
You know, it's a really good question, and I'm not sure that we have enough distance from it yet to see it clearly. But I suspect that when we do, we will see the suspension of Merrick Garland's nomination, Mitch McConnell's unwillingness to hold even a hearing on a presidential nominee for the Supreme Court 9 months or a year before the election, as the canary in the coal mine. As the moment where we saw at the most basic level and at the highest level of the Congress, a willingness to sacrifice the institutions, co-equal branches of government, in the service of a naked desire to hold on to power. That confirmation was held up, yes, in part to put, in the hopes of putting a conservative judge on the bench instead of a moderate one. But the real reason that Mitch McConnell held up that confirmation was to motivate conservatives to turn out and vote in an election in which he feared they wouldn't do so for Donald Trump. And that was all about maintaining Mitch McConnell's position as majority leader. Jamming through Amy Coney Barrett, yes, adds another conservative to the court, and that's an extra benefit. But the primary benefit is to excite conservatives to turn out in the election we just had. The desire now of Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and other enablers in the Congress going along with what they realize is just a body blow to our democracy. A president lying about the last presidential election, propagating this bogus and monumental lie about massive fraud, claiming that he won these states that he lost. Why on earth would people, anyone of good conscience, go along with that? Well, it's now about the Georgia special election. Mitch McConnell doesn't want to anger Donald Trump before the Georgia special election. And you can rationalize each of these decisions with the political expedient of the day. The cumulative impact, though, has just been a wrecking ball to our democracy. And, you know, the rationalization, who knows where it ends? You might hope it ends when all the courts have made their decision and Joe Biden is sworn in, but with Donald Trump threatening to run again in 4 years, will they be cowed for another 4 years from doing their duty, from defending our democracy? You know, I do think when this chapter of history is written, it will reserve some of its most damning language for the members of Congress that went along with this amoral, autocratic president.
We were very pleased to host Jeff Flake, former Senator Jeff Flake, who chose not to run again because of what he feared a Republican primary that he couldn't win. But a very impressive public servant, by the way, as I'm sure you realize. You know,
can I say something about Jeff? Jeff and I came to Congress together, and we're friends, and I have a lot of respect for Jeff. Jeff could have been reelected if that's what he cared about more than anything else. Jeff could have done the same thing that so many of his colleagues did. You know, after all, so many of them in the presidential primary criticized Trump in the harshest of terms. You look at what Ted Cruz had to say, or Lindsey Graham had to say, you know, the list goes on and on about how unethical Trump was, how he was the chaos president, how he was going to destroy this, and how he was a pathologic liar. I mean, you just look at what the Republicans had to say, let alone the Democrats.
They were right.
They were right, but you know, they all capitulated because it was more important to them to cling to their office than to do the right thing, than to speak the truth, than to confront this dangerous man. But there was something more important to Jeff Flake than merely holding office. I think his family was more important to him. He wanted to look his kids in the eye. I think his faith was more important to him. He wanted to live his faith. I don't think it's an accident that Mitt Romney, another person of faith, also found there were more important things than, you know, simply increasing the chances of re-election. And, you know, the fact that there are so few Jeff Flakes and Mitt Romneys is a terrible commentary about today's Republican Party. You know, I think Donald Trump has destroyed it. I don't know. I had hoped, frankly, Dean, that the repudiation would be so great that the Republican Party would return to its roots. The Republican Party used to have an ideology, used to stand for something, and I might disagree with what they stood for, but they at least stood for something. What do they stand for now? They stand for Donald Trump. That's it. They stand for the person of the president. And that's not an enduring ideology. And it's also just a disastrous one for the party and for the country.
But this election was not the repudiation that some people had predicted. So Biden won what seems to be a pretty convincing victory. But the House Democrats, who expected to increase their majority, lost a bunch of seats. What do you think happened?
I think that this election was a national referendum on Donald Trump. And that is what motivated people to turn out. During the last 4 years, he has very successfully polarized this country to the point where you have people in warring camps. And so people essentially, unless they had a really good reason, voted straight down the ticket. And the people who survived that, you know, in the midterm election 2 years ago, we swept the tables. We won just about every seat we were going to win, and a lot more that we didn't expect to win.
Yep.
Normally, you would be defending those seats, but the polling suggested we not only could defend them, that we could actually expand our ranks. Obviously, the polling was wrong. It wasn't just our polling. It was the Republicans' polling. It was the independent polling. And that's a whole different subject, why the polling was so wrong. But at the end of the day, people were not in the mood to split their ticket unless they had a compelling reason. And a lot of our returning members gave them a compelling reason. They had 2 years to establish an identity that could be separate from the top of the ticket. And yet some didn't. And our challengers struck out completely. And I think the reason why the challengers struck out is they were not as well known to the constituents as those that were even 2 years in office. And it was harder to create a separate identity from the top of the ticket. And so I really think that's what happened. People just voted party line unless they had a compelling reason not to.
Yeah. Let's think about the future a little bit. Foreign policy is one of your areas of expertise. You served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, on the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Subcommittee of Appropriations, and you're currently the chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. When he takes office, what issues should President Biden prioritize in the area of America's foreign policy?
You know, I think that the enduring challenge of the foreseeable future will be China. China is a determined competitor, rival, adversary, it really depends on what domain you're asking about, very formidable. They're formidable in space, they're formidable at sea, they're formidable in science, they're formidable in cyber, they're formidable as an economic powerhouse. And we're going to need to be completely on our game to compete with that. And we can do that. But we're going to have to, I think anew about how we're spending our resources. We're going to have to think anew about how we encourage the best and the brightest to come here, not discourage them, which is what we've been doing over the last 4 years. We're going to have to think about how we retool our education to compete in science and technology. We're going to have to do better protecting our own technology and intellectual property. We're going to have to do better insisting on trade that is fair and gives American workers access to Chinese markets. And we're going to have to re-engage diplomatically and with development around the world because otherwise China's going to eat our lunch. And so I think that will be the single greatest challenge, not just for Joe Biden, but for the next several US presidents. Russia is a wounded animal. It is a dying economy. It is a petroleum thugocracy, which makes them dangerous. And Vladimir Putin considers the world a zero-sum game where anything that inures to our benefit is against Russian interests and vice versa. They have a lot of nuclear weapons. They have ways of delivering them. They are more than willing to use their power, military power, as well as their cyber power around the world in ruthless and unethical ways. And so that's going to be a persistent challenge. The one thing that Putin respects is strength. What Donald Trump has shown him is just utter weakness. Donald Trump has allowed himself to be so easily manipulated by Putin. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, it doesn't take the best intelligence services to discern the fact that all you need to do is praise Donald Trump. Say nice things about Donald Trump and you pretty much can get what you want. That's obviously going to change under Joe Biden. It's going to have to change because the failure of US leadership has aggrandized this dangerous power at our expense. Iran and its nuclear program are going to have to be an immediate priority. I think Joe Biden will try to re-engage on the Iranian nuclear deal. If we're fortunate, he can go broader than the nuclear deal and try to constrain Iran's other malevolent action, its missile program, its state sponsorship of terror. But Iran will also be a huge priority. North Korea, I imagine early in the Biden administration, will test the Biden administration by either testing new nuclear materials or their delivery system. So those are, I think, some of the paramount national security and foreign policy challenges that the Biden administration will confront.
Well, I appreciated your answer because the reason I asked the question was to give me some guidance for when I interview Biden's chief foreign policy advisor, Tony Blinken, on Monday. So I appreciate that.
You bet.
We have a number of students who have been itching to ask questions. So we're going to open it up now. And our first student questioner, just give us your name and your school and your question. So Ella, you're first up.
Hi, I'm Ella Cam in the School of Arts and Sciences. My question is, in the event that Republicans maintain control of the Senate after the Georgia special election, do you think that without Trump in the executive branch, Republican senators will be more willing to pass legislation from the House, or do you think that the dynamic that we've had for the past 4 years will continue?
Well, I think that with respect to the Senate, Joe Biden's long experience in the Senate will be very helpful. The relationships that he has, his ability to work well with others will help him get through things through the Senate, will help him negotiate deals with the Senate. The bigger problem may be the House of Representatives, where we will now have a very narrow majority. Because Kevin McCarthy will view any deal, any bill, any agreement, any effort that makes the House look functional as a detriment to his ability to gain a majority in the midterms. You know, tragically, one of the GOP tactics historically has been make the governing party unable to govern, and then go to voters and say they haven't done anything. I think that's what Kevin McCarthy is going to try to do. And that will be a terrible disservice to the country. If every party operated that way, we'd never get anything done. But, you know, McCarthy has no other objective, no other scruple. Even today, you might have seen Kevin McCarthy saying that something to the effect that he expected Donald Trump to be president next year. So, you know, someone with that's willing to be that dishonest is very hard to work with. And, you know, but we don't have any choice. Frankly, we can't wait even till Joe Biden is sworn in. We need to get a relief package passed in the lame duck passed now. There are millions of businesses that are teetering on the edge. Lots of those businesses won't be around in January, and they won't come back if we can't help them now. And lots of people are unemployment, and that unemployment is running out or is already run out, and they can't wait another 2 months. And the list goes on and on, people at risk of being evicted from their homes. So we need to get something done right now. There may be a different calculus, happily, in the GOP and the lame duck to get something done. Mitch McConnell is talking more positively about getting a relief package done than he was before the election. Before the election, it divided their caucus, and there was little incentive for him to take up something that divided their members and united Democratic members. But that calculus will hopefully change now.
Next questioner is another student, Deep. You're up.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, hi.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Deep, and I just graduated from Tufts with the class of 2020. My question is, should we abolish the Electoral College? And if so, what would a realistic path towards that look like? Do initiatives like the Popular Vote, Interstate Compact have any chance of being successful?
I think we should get rid of the Electoral College. I think it is a anti-democratic anachronism at this point. And I think that you're right. Probably the most viable path is that Interstate Compact. We came very close to having enough states and state legislatures to pass it to get to the critical number. And for those that are listening that may be less familiar with it, the way the compact would work is states would agree that when enough states join the compact representing 270 electoral votes, they would all agree that whoever won the popular vote nationally would get all of the electoral votes from that state. That would effectively do away with the Electoral College, because it would mean that the popular vote would be determinative of presidential elections. And I think that's the way it should be. I also think an important process reform is to do away with the gerrymander, pass national redistricting reform. That would mean that the House would likewise represent the popular will. One of the reasons why Republicans gained ground, apart from it being a very nationalized election, is that a lot of their seats, because of Republican legislatures, are so gerrymandered that both parties can't compete there. And states are very lopsided in their representation. If you look at Florida, for example, which is split fairly down the middle, it's probably 2/3, 1/3 Republican representation in the House because the gerrymandering is so bad. And the same is true in states like Texas and others. So national redistricting reform, I would put on a par with Electoral College reform. The most difficult nut to crack, frankly, is the anti-democratic nature of the US Senate, in which I think something like 23% of the US population controls 60% of the votes in the Senate. So what do you do about that? Well, you either amend the Constitution, which is obviously very difficult to do, or you admit the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico into the Union, in which case they have representation in the Senate, and it begins to chip away at the anti-democratic nature of the Senate. But those are, I think, the three areas that we need to consider reform.
You don't think we can take a Senate seat away from Wyoming and maybe a couple of others, Montana, a couple of sparsely populated, although I wouldn't want to take, I'd be careful about Montana. Next questioner is Aram. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You're muted.
Now I'm not, I believe.
No, now you're okay. Talk up though.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that thank you so much for your immensely clear voice that was full of integrity during the impeachment process. And I think that that really stood out to so many of us. I originally come from Pakistan and am thus unfortunately very familiar with what happens to polities as they're divided into patriots and traitors and military takeovers of government. I'm petrified of what is happening here at present with the refusal to begin the transition to a democratically elected government. Why don't we have any apparent levers to check what seems to be happening? And how safe is the US from ultra-constitutional takeover as a place and as an emotive idea around the world?
Thank you for the question. And you know, one of the most powerful op-eds, I think, of the last year was written by 4 immigrants from countries that had experienced dictatorship. And had said they had lived in a country before it was a dictatorship, and they had watched it become a dictatorship. And they wrote about how what they were seeing is exactly what they saw in their old country, and don't think it can't happen here. It was, I have to say, it was chilling as hell. And we really have to recognize it could happen here. That is not hyperbolic. You know, we like to think of ourselves as so unique and special that things like that can't happen here because we've had such a long tradition of democracy. But it could happen here. We've gone much farther down that path than I would have ever imagined in 4 years. And if Donald Trump had been given another 4 years, who knows what the country would look like at that point. In terms of you know, what can be done about it, why isn't there a mechanism to prevent against it? There are actually a lot of mechanisms to prevent against it. But at the end of the day, and this is something that I think we discovered during the impeachment process, it's only as good as the people who are implementing and effectuating it. You know, one of the things that I pointed out during the trial is it doesn't matter how well the Constitution is written, doesn't matter how brilliant the founders were, doesn't matter how well written the oath of impartiality is. If it's not going to be lived by our elected representatives, there is no protection. You know, I think our system is as well designed as it can be because we set ambition against the ambition. We have certain checks. But the expectation was that the Congress would have some interest in its own institution. When Republicans allowed the president to do an end run around the power of the purse to build the wall, our most important power in Congress is the purse. You know, I used to have an intellectual debate with myself about what was our most important power. Was it the power to declare war, or was it the power of the purse? And it won't surprise you, I think, to know that I concluded it was the power of the purse, because you can declare war or not declare war, or you authorize war or not authorize it, and the president doesn't have to listen to you. But if you defund the war, you can stop it. And so ultimately, it's the money that makes the policy. And if the Congress was willing to let the president usurp that power, well, then what was it not prepared to let him do? And so we can and will strengthen some of the guardrails. That post-Watergate package I mentioned is designed to do that. Right now, we are doing everything we can to speak out, to prepare. Obviously, we are litigating to protect the franchise, the votes cast by millions of Americans. But we need people of good faith in the Republican Party to put the country first. Until they do, the Republic is not safe. It can't be just one party to uphold our Constitution and values. That just won't work.
We have another student to go to, but if I may just interject a quick question from the Q&A list. Do you think there's any chance that Trump would form a third party after he leaves office? And would that shake things up and maybe force the Republican Party to redefine itself?
You think about the Teddy Roosevelt example, and he has the base to do what Teddy Roosevelt did, but he doesn't have the need to. He owns that party, lock, stock, and barrel. All of these presidential wannabes who are falling all over themselves to repeat his lies. They're not stupid people. They know exactly what they're doing. Do you think for a moment that Lindsey Graham has any doubt about the votes, or Ted Cruz, or any of these people?
Ted Cruz is a Harvard Law School graduate. He must be smart, right?
Well, some of my Harvard Law School colleagues in the Congress, and I won't mention which, my grandmother had a term for them. She used to call them brilliant fools. I think about that expression quite often. But yeah, he owns the party, and he may own it for the foreseeable future. As long as, and here's what's going to happen. Donald Trump, during the course of his administration, sucks people in, chews them up, and spits them out. He's done that with countless people who served in his administration, who did unethical things for him, but ultimately drew a line somewhere, and that wasn't good enough. It's never good enough for Donald Trump. Well, these folks that are bending over backwards now for him, he's going to chew them up and spit them out. They're doing that so they can run in 4 years, and maybe he'll decide he's going to run in 4 years, and the hell with them. Or at some point, they stop kissing the ring sufficiently, and he turns on them then. If there's been any solace in watching this terrible display of debasement over the last 4 years, it's to see so many of these people get their comeuppance. But I don't think he needs to form a third party, because he just owns this one so completely.
Yeah. Chase, you're next up. Thanks for letting me interject that question.
No problem. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to congratulate you on your successful re-election campaign.
Thank you.
So, as a congressman, you voted in favor of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And in 2015, you publicly displayed your regret of that vote, citing that the intelligence was dead wrong and that it led to a series of events which had disastrous consequences. As young adults, we are constantly told to learn from our past actions, whether they're successes or mistakes. How do you take what you learned from Iraq and apply it to your actions as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee? Or in short, how does what you learned from the past affect your work as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee now?
It's affected my work greatly, and more than my work, it's also affected the intelligence community in reforms within the intelligence community, so that dissenting voices, like in Iraq, in the intelligence on Iraq, the State Department has their own intelligence outfit. And the State Department disagreed with other elements of the intelligence community. But essentially, the State Department intelligence shop wasn't listened to. And dissenting voices were suppressed within the intelligence community. There was a conclusion the administration wanted to reach. Some of the intelligence community leadership were eager to help them reach that conclusion. And as a result, we both had bad intelligence, and the intelligence we had was politicized in a destructive way. So we have built-in safeguards to try to ensure that dissenting voices within the intelligence community are heard. We, up until the Trump administration, did our best to insulate the intelligence community from political interference. So agency heads weren't trying to provide intelligence or spin intelligence to suit the president's political desires or desires to go to war or any other desires. Those reforms have broken down badly over the last 4 years. Indeed, so much of my effort over the last 4 years has been to try to keep the intelligence community honest, to try to keep it apolitical, to try to insist that they speak truth to power. So this is part of, frankly, my hard lesson to learn from Iraq was that we need to constantly oversee and scrutinize the intelligence community to make sure they're telling us what they see, they're not spinning it, they're not distorting it, they're not misleading in what they say about it. I think that for a long time, comparatively during the Trump administration, we were successful. And because we were successful, the president fired Dan Coats, because Dan Coats, a former Republican senator from Indiana, and the top intelligence official, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the director, he spoke truth to power. President doesn't like speaking truth to power, and he lost his job. And he was replaced by Joe McGuire. Joe McGuire allowed Congress to be briefed on the fact that Russia was intervening again, and with the same object as 4 years earlier, to help elect Donald Trump. So he was fired. And then Rick Grinnell was appointed. Rick Grinnell is nothing but a partisan hack. You see Rick Grinnell today out in Nevada doing press conferences, making completely bogus claims of election fraud. That guy was running our intelligence agencies. That was a disaster. That was the most politicized until we got John Ratcliffe, who has been doing much the same thing. So, we had personnel who were, I think, doing their duty, and they've been fired. We have others that may get fired in the next 2 months. There are obviously a lot of public reports about whether Gina Haspel will be the next to fall, or whether Christopher Wray will be the next to fall. But I consider a big part of my responsibility as a member of Congress and as chair of the Intel Committee to insist on the best intelligence, make sure that we have the resources to get it, and to make sure that it's ruthlessly apolitical.
You've been very generous with your time, Congressman. I have one other questioner. If he makes it real quick, can we take one last one, Chris? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Chairman. Thank you for coming. As a fellow Californian who used to live in McCarthy's district, and also coming from your old stomping grounds of Scottsdale, Arizona right now.
Excellent.
Since you're an attorney and prosecutor by training, I have a constitutional question for you. And it's not altogether hypothetical. If Article 6 of the Constitution says that, in part, all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. And if Article 7 says, in suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right to a trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of common law. The question becomes, if Donald Trump is to face either criminal prosecution and or civil litigation after leaving office, how on earth in our common law system would impartial jury selection be possible? In another way, who on earth believes that the jury is still out on Donald Trump's moral character?
Thank you, Chris.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and that is if any of the civil litigation or the president should be indicted, how do you find an impartial jury? And I have to say it'll be very difficult, but it can be done, and it's done through a very extensive voir dire. A very extensive questioning of the jury. And It doesn't mean that people don't have political views. It doesn't mean that you're going to find people who didn't vote for Donald Trump or against Donald Trump. It means you have to look for people who can put that aside and make an objective decision based on the facts. And so the skill of the attorneys in being able to ask the right questions to elicit the answers and determine, okay, is this juror capable of doing that? I mean, I imagine the judge would start out by asking, how many of you think you could be fair? And a lot of them are going to say that they couldn't be fair, they feel too strong, and then they're gone. And then you have a pool that says they can be fair, but can they really be fair? And that's where the attorneys get to work, to examine those potential jurors and find a sufficient number of them, and I believe that you can, who would be able to set aside whatever political views or personal views they have of the president and look at the specific factual legal issues at trial. So it will be tough, but it can be done. There have been notorious crimes, publicly, extensively written about, talked about, where yet they have been able to find impartial jurors. And they're not people who live in a cave and haven't heard anything. They're people who have heard, but are able to set it aside.
Thank you so much. This has been really a treat to listen to you. I've had the privilege of hearing you on a number of occasions on a number of issues, and this was, I really appreciate your sharing your time with the Tufts community, Mr. Chairman. I want to remind people that next week we have Tony Blinken on Monday, we have Bob Putnam on Wednesday, and we have Hank Azaria, a proud Tufts alum, on Friday. But I can't think of that anything is going to top this evening in terms of really an intelligent discussion of some of the most critical things we're facing today in our political world. So thank you very much. Remember, the Tufts Marathon team would welcome you if you want to run Boston.
Well, say hello to Hank Azaria. I think he may be a constituent of mine.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Good night now. Thank you all.